Hi, we're here with two luminaries from the DNA Doe Project who want to talk about their work today. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
I'm Colleen Fitzpatrick. I'm one of the founders and I am the co-executive director of DNA Doe Project.
And I'm Margaret Press, and I'm the other co-founder and the other executive director, and we founded the project a little over a year ago, incorporated as a nonprofit, and we've been talking every day since then.
You have done quite a bit since I saw you last year. Maybe one of you want to just update me on how DNA Doe was formed and why and what you've been doing.
Well, we saw you a year ago, and we were just starting to incorporate that month, but we had our first case for a couple of weeks, so we were a little distracted at Ishi, and we would go back to our hotel rooms every night afterwards and look at his results, look at his matches, and wonder what we were seeing, if it was even real.
So interesting. Do you want to talk about that first case?
That was Chandler, right?
Chandler, right.
That was actually interesting because Joseph Chandler was a man who stole, that was not his name, he stole somebody's identity. It was a man who committed suicide, the name adopted by a man who committed suicide in Cleveland, Ohio area in 2002. When he died, they discovered in trying to contact his relatives that wasn't his name. He had taken that name in 1978, and it was the identity of a boy who had been killed in a car accident in 1945.
Wow.
So that's a pretty cold case. In 2002, really nothing was really done. They did a lot of investigative work, but with no conclusions. In 2014, however, they were able to find a tissue sample from a cancer biopsy he had had in the 1990s. And from that tissue, they were able to extract DNA. It was highly degraded, but yet they were able to get a CODIS profile that didn't match anything. So when we came in 2016, that's what Margaret's referring to, we put the pedal to the metal because not only was this our first case, where we had no roadmap to figure out whether this would even work with DNA, we had some reason to believe DNA would work from a deceased person on GEDmatch, but this was highly degraded DNA from a deceased person, so it added a layer of complexity. So we were kind of unsure how it would work out, but the end is we made the identification. That was our first success story in March of this year.
That's so remarkable. How did you two find each other to begin working on this case, before it became the DNA Doe Project?
Facebook?
That's
where matches are made, right?
I had this crazy idea that the methods we were using in adoptee searches could be used for does, and started reaching out to everyone I could imagine on the internet, and saw Colleen's page as a forensic genealogist who might actually get it. And once we made contact, she did, and had all her contacts with the agencies where she could actually get us cases. That was the key, that and her brilliance in the area of DNA and genetics and forensics.
That's pretty remarkable.
I want to say we made a good pair because I was not so much in the a match made in heaven. I wasn't so much in the genealogy world. I had moved more into forensics.
Okay.
So I wasn't doing genealogy day to day, although I kept up with it. So I had more contacts in law enforcement and forensics. I've been working cold cases since 2011. But Margaret had the other side of that equation with all the knowledge of the tools in genetic genealogy, knew what was the buzz, knew what was the new stuff. She had all that. And, we pulled together a team of volunteers sort of from both sides, and the rest is history.
Did you have any idea where genetic genealogy was going? I mean, that's in the headlines every day almost now.
Genetic genealogy we knew was exploding with adoptee searches, so this was really the next logical step. The perfect storm last year was that sequencing, all testing was getting cheaper, particularly whole genome sequencing, which is the route we had to go because Ancestry and 23andMe won't let you send in DNA extract, only vials or swabs. So that and the fact that the databases had grown so huge, just every year they shoot up another, they double. That makes adoptee searches, for example, very successful in about half the time, just because so much of the population is represented in the database through third and fourth cousins. It doesn't have to be you yourself having tested. So I think we got the picture that the field was just exploding. Use in forensic genealogy, we knew right away, would be very possible. We didn't expect so much success. Very possible with unidentified remains, because there's no reason not for this to not work. But also for suspects. It was the same procedure, exactly the same. We made a decision early on because we wanted to be careful of public reaction and ease our way into it, that we would not do assailant crime scene samples as part of our nonprofit group, because the waters hadn't been tested for any forensic use. We did not want the one database open to us, GEDmatch, to have to shut down because of any public outcry.
Now, if you ask me, I would have not had an answer because I was so busy thinking about that day and how to advance. I would have had to think about it, but after some thought, I would have said, yes, I think it's going to be really big once we cross over, the forensics makes contact with genetic genealogy. I think it's going to be big, but I really would not have said this big this quick.
It's been really remarkable to watch. What are some of the challenging aspects of what you do?
Everything.
Degraded, everything. As Colleen said, there was no roadmap. I think of all the pieces that we had to invent on the fly by the seat of our pants, the hardest is that unlike with assailant crime scene samples where the DNA is usually pretty good, our DNA is typically very, very bad. So we have a very small amount of the genome to work with. I think our best has been 50 to 70% after a lot of bioinformatics work. But when we see matches, normally you can say, oh, a third cousin, good, I know that's a third cousin, I'll go work the tree. But with our cases, is that a real third cousin, or is it a figment of the matching algorithms, stitching algorithms, and imputation that GEDmatch does behind the scene? So we have an extra dimension of uncertainty that makes everything we do, we have to question our assumptions, and that's been the most difficult in my mind.
Well, I want to say that everything, because if you consider we started out with scratch, we had to figure out how to approach agencies explaining something they never heard of and really to this day probably don't understand exactly. We had to find the ones that were open, get the right kind of DNA sent to the right lab. We had to research the labs. We had to research bioinformatics capabilities. We had those first samples came in. We had to tweak the bioinformatics up and down and sideways to try and get that sweet spot so the GED-matchable DNA was maximum. We had to Margaret says, look at the matches, make sure they were real and not ghosts, figments of the GED-match imagination. And then we had to puzzle it out and do the genealogy work, had to get the volunteers, we had to get the non-disclosure, we had to get the 501c3 in place, we had to get an attorney, we had to get a CPA, we had to get the infrastructure going, and then we actually had to make the identifications, which opened another whole set of experiences with the law enforcement, contacting the families, dealing with the families, how they felt, what we could do, what we could say, what we should hold back, and then of course all the production companies descending on us unmercifully day by day. So we've had no roadmap with this, so everything was challenging, but we're doing good, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, I think that's an understatement, absolutely. So you had that success with Chandler. What came next? Walk us through how it happened over the last year.
Chandler was 3,000 hours. The next one was 4.
So, right, 4 hours, not 4,000.
So
Chandler was our
really-
first solve. Chandler was our first solve, but we weren't allowed to announce him.
And that's what we're
for
talking
3
about at Ishii, by
months.
the way, Chandler.
The
Say
Chandler
that.
case, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I would say that's the hardest. That was the hardest part. The whole thing was keeping quiet for 3 months on the Chandler case.
That's another part, yeah.
Oh, yes, and especially with production companies
Yeah.
descending.
Right. Well, and people saying, "Well, do you have any success stories?" And we wanted to say, "Well, yeah."
Very big one. Yeah.
But we can't talk about it.
Yeah.
So shortly after that, the Buckskin Girl case came through. The files became ready. We're assuming that when we mention
Okay.
GEDmatch, we don't need
And we
to.
think, okay, this one's going to be 3,000 hours.
Right. But just as an aside, we would have spent 20 minutes explaining that GEDmatch is a public online database and genetic genealogy tool. But by now, I think probably most of your audience will have heard about GEDmatch.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. When Buckskin came in, and the match list of DNA cousins that they call matches, even though they're third or fourth cousins, finished populating. We had a first cousin once removed on the top of the list, and
That's like shaking hands with
it's
the person.
really like she just hauled out her driver's
Wow.
license for us.
How did that
essentially.
feel?
Oh, it was
It
incredible.
was like, oh, we weren't excited. You weren't
no,
excited
I said,
either, were you?
"Hi, I'll go to bed."
No, but this was 1 o'clock in the morning when this happened, so you can
Right.
bet we're there hammering it. And it was funny because Margaret and I were on the phone. Oh, go, look here, look there. You know, we're building those trees out.
You click those, I'll click these.
And I'm like typing, looking, and I see this tree building itself, and I know she's on the other end doing that.
But so are 4 volunteers.
Yeah, we're-
Everyone's building the tree, and saying,
Yeah.
"OMG."
So anyway, Margaret then, as we're building the tree, checking the cousins, Margaret says, "I have chills up my spine." And I go, "Oh my God, now what?" And she had come up with, we dug out a cousin once removed, and it was Marcia, Lenore, Sussman King. On Ancestry, a profile, it gave her birth date in 1959, and under that, the date of death said missing, assumed dead.
Wow.
That was it, yeah.
That was
yeah.
it. Wow. And Margaret's saying, well, maybe there's 2 of them. Let's make sure.
Yeah, well,
And
I'm
going,
always the
"No,
one to say, don't
Margaret."
jump to
Yeah,
conclusions.
don't jump to conclusions. It may be 2. No, I said, that's it.
She could have a twin.
But her father had, that information had come from her father, who had posted a tree, but he died in January, so he never knew.
Oh, so close, yeah. So then the next hardest part was waiting 3 hours until the
world
agency
woke up.
up so we could make a call.
Yes, what do you do? What do you do when you have that
call.
moment?
We call the agency because in these cases,
Yeah, we just
similar
call
to
the
adoptees, with adoptee searches, when you find a parent, you turn that over to the adoptee. You don't make that call. You let them make that contact when they're ready. So in a way, it's the same with the does. You want the
Okay.
doe to make the contact
Yeah.
through the agency.
Okay.
They are used to notifying next of kin, which is
Yeah.
what this is. It's a
And-
death notification.
Right, and it's a legal thing, so we step aside and let them handle it, but we're available to assist or to, if the family wants to talk to us, great.
Sure.
But we
And they
hand over.
have, yeah.
Yeah, we've talked to some families.
Right. So
has
what
to be
they
difficult.
usually do is they contact, and they have that close family member, if it's a parent or child, go into their local police station and get swabbed for a
Yeah,
CODIS
CODIS.
test to
Sure.
confirm the DNA match legally and forensically. And that's been true in 2 cases.
Yeah.
In the third, it was the parents had a set of fingerprints for the child.
What was your third case? What was that one?
Sorry, what was the what?
What was the third case? Let's talk about
That was the
too.
Lyle Stevic
Lyle
case.
Stevic, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
He hung himself in a hotel room in Washington State in 2001, and he had become a cult figure. There were Reddit pages, web sleuth pages, on and on and on.
Wow.
And so one day I received one too many emails about Lyle Stevic. Can you look at Lyle Stevic? And I said, Margaret, why not make GoFundMe, which is how we raise money for cases. I said, this would be a good case to start with. So we posted a GoFundMe button and we raised the money immediately, really very quickly, to have the DNA done and sequenced. And it was a little bit tough case, but that was our third success story.
The GoFundMe, did that surprise you that it went so quickly?
Well, it didn't because the contact was through a Reddit community of 1,000 people who'd been following this
Yeah.
case for
Okay.
years. So when he then posted back on Reddit, Colleen Fitzpatrick, the rock star, is going to take this case. It exploded with excitement. And he said we needed to raise funds. $1,500 is what these tests cost.
Yeah, at the time.
They all started pledging on the spot. You know, I'll pledge this, I'll pledge that, I'll pledge, I can
So-
only afford $5.
Yeah.
But we knew by the time, and we said, no money until he passes QC, quality control, quality testing at the lab, because if
If it
there's not enough
doesn't,
DNA
yeah.
to sequence, there's no point in raising funds. But as soon as that was accomplished, we said, okay, here's the button, and they all came
Bang.
through immediately.
Yeah.
So, you know, hats off to the Reddit community. They did a lot of hard work on their own, and almost all of them were just phenomenal. And having that kind of support, I think, was a big lesson for us, that these does have, you know, in a way, fan
People
clubs,
care.
people that have become their
People care.
online families while waiting for the real families to be discovered.
Yeah. You know, I wanted to make a comment about going to law enforcement, which is kind of interesting. And that is that I spoke to someone in the DA's office the other day. And, he was asking a lot of the intelligent questions, how it works. And I said that whatever we provide you is a lead. You have to go make the legal identification. So he said, like, what do you mean by lead? I said, well, suppose we did this work. We came to you with the lead, and it was that Joseph Newton Chandler, his real name was Robin Ivan Nichols. He was born in September 13th, 1926 in New Albany, Indiana. He was married to Lorraine Court in the late 1950s. He had 3 sons, 2 of which are still alive. His parents were Silas Nichols and Alpha Schreiber. I said, and we have his high school graduation picture.
And his Social Security
I said,
number.
yeah, and Social Security, that's a lead.
That is a very good lead.
And the DA, a whole room cracked up.
And we do not report to them, in most cases, we do not report to them with a name until we are 99.9.
Yeah,
I will
we
never say
don't.
100%. This is
No,
what we
she
argue.
doesn't say it.
I never say it's
But we close.
proven,
We close
right.
enough that they can run with it.
We don't want them to go to the wrong person
Well, you
and
know,
notify.
Margaret, if they do CODIS, that's not really legal because it's not 100%.
I know, it's a
that-
high degree of
Maybe it's not
right.
Chandler, it's that 99,
Twin brother that they didn't know existed.
It's only 1 in 10 trillion.
Right.
There's a little
in a-
room for error there.
In a couple cases, it's been hard to narrow down the exact person if they've been siblings, and they're hard to tease
yeah.
out in terms of just the genetics. So we've included the investigator as sort of part of the team,
Yeah.
and they will go off and look in their databases that we can't get access to
Yeah.
for
There was-
work history or other kinds of clues
There was one case, a sheep flat that...
that we can't identify yet.
Yeah, we can't tell you who she is, but there was a family story. She had a sister from a distant relative that had apparently met her or the family once a long time ago. And so that was important because if they're 2 sisters, their genealogy is going to look, right, identical. And so we got the investigator involved. And then that investigator did brilliant work. She found the neighbors they grew up next to. She found
Actually, our
work
volunteers
history.
did.
Oh, the volunteers did
Yeah,
that.
a volunteer
Okay.
came up with the brilliant idea of finding the
finding
next door neighbors.
And that was true. And then the investigator pulled up birth records. I don't know if she got adoption. Yeah, she got some adoption records. Or,
Not for, right.
oh yeah,
right,
for not
right,
for that.
Right.
But she pulled up, work history. She pulled up birth records that were from the '60s.
And she contacted the neighbors.
Yeah, contacted the neighbors. So, we involved her because, we got to the point where we had done what we could on this side of the legal fence, and the investigator, of course, has access to a lot more. And that's why we found out that the sister was fictional, and that really the woman had 2 brothers, and then finally the investigator found a set of fingerprints from the 1960s when the woman had been arrested for a misdemeanor. We can't go there, so we're very happy when the investigators get involved.
Wow, that's really remarkable. When you think about it, Facebook, Reddit, reaching out to...
It takes a village.
It really does, and it has been so successful.
Yeah.
How many cases have you worked on or are you working on? Well, let's talk about have you worked on and what's the success rate? It sounds phenomenal.
We have 7 right now that have gone to GEDCOM.
GEDmatch.
Sorry, GEDmatch, right. We've had a couple that the DNA was too degraded, so they're non-starters, but our bioinformatics guy is still working on whether he can get us better data. We have several that are in sequencing right now, and we have a couple that have been shipped to the sequencing lab that needed to have DNA extracted from bone or fingernails. So
Yeah.
this morning, fingernails are on their way.
Yeah, and we have some still getting bone extractions.
Right,
I'd say
right.
we have 20 in the pipeline. We've had probably, I'd say 7 that are on GEDmatch or have been.
Right.
And-
Including the solves, of which
Yeah,
there
4
are
out of
4 and close on a 5th.
Yeah,
I'd say,
4.
yeah.
So 4.5 out of 7, and soon to be 5, we think, we hope.
Which is really remarkable when you think
We-
about
we
this
didn't
cold
think we'd
cases
get that
that have
close.
A year
existed
ago,
for so long.
I said maybe we'll get 1 in 10.
Yeah,
You
but
know?
amazing.
So what do you do now when you solve a case? Do you
Well-
pop a bottle of champagne and then
We
what
have
do
a
you
little-
do?
little
Different
Facebook party.
locations, yeah.
I invite everybody over to my house, so they'll fly
And no one
in.
comes, right?
Yeah, nobody comes. Champagne, and I drink the whole thing myself.
Well, it's become like a family. The group, the team that works on a case gets very close, and it's so surreal. I mean, we take it for granted now, but it's so surreal to not even know these people, except that you know them
Yeah.
through Facebook.
Yeah.
And that's an important source of comfort when things are going hard.
Yeah.
You know, when they're tough.
It's so funny. Some of the volunteers specialize in certain things. One of our volunteers specializes in doing educational webinars.
Okay.
So he's put together a few webinars for like the new volunteers, and he put together the go-to meeting. What was
Right,
it, the
yeah,
other
we had our
day?
first meeting.
And we had our first big meeting among the volunteers. the
But I
other
think in
night.
terms of celebration, it's pretty, it's pretty, we're ecstatic, but we're already moving on to our other cases. So everyone is more motivated by the puzzle
Yeah,
than by the success.
yeah. A new case comes in, everybody goes, boom!
Right, right. And then it's a madhouse.
And everybody's madhouse, you know.
I love
Yeah,
it.
But,
it's,
you know, as we get more cases, we
it's
have
very
team
chaotic,
leaders. We're
yeah.
developing team leaders.
we're trying to become more structured.
Yeah,
Yes,
we
it's-
are, we will.
Over the short course of a year, it's been big change. How many volunteers are you working with, and how do they find you?
We have about 45
Okay.
now, and we've really stopped bringing in more genetic genealogists because we have plenty. And we do divide them up into teams and are going to be structuring that more with our future cases. We brought in a lot because we thought with the ones in the pipeline, we would need 5 to 10 volunteers on each case, and they were starting to come in. The problem, it's a great problem to have, is we were solving them. So the volunteers on a solved case need something to do. So we really didn't need any new volunteers. The ones that we bring on board now are retired homicide detectives that contact us, private eyes, people
Yeah.
with a lot of specialized research or Google
Yeah.
experience that are just above and beyond. So it's a very diverse team now.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful network of people that can, you know, we have a couple who can do facial reconstruction or recognition or whatever, or have other skills that are really important
Yeah,
to us.
that's right. We have facial artist that does facial reconstructions, and he's pretty good. You know, we have the guy in the education. We have people that are working on outreach. So in fact, the fact that we have quite a lot of volunteers in a few cases right now, actually I think that's beneficial because that means everybody's going to start specializing in what they can do to help and developing their little niche of expertise that will go forward as we do get more genetic genealogists that are not specialized.
It's so fascinating. What's next? What do you see the next year looking like?
Well, there's in 2007 there was a Bureau of Justice Statistics survey done of how many unknown dead there were in various coroners and medical examiners' office. The answer was 40,000. And that's
And we've heard that's
supposed to
about
be,
right. Yeah.
Really, you think it's about right?
Beth Murray said
Okay,
that she
we've
felt that
heard-
statistic was
but
about right.
10 years later,
Those are just reported.
those are the ones that are reported.
We don't know, but
Yeah,
there's
right.
there's plenty to keep us.
Yeah, so in the next year, we're going to do them all. That's what I was going to say. You know, 5 is just the hors d'oeuvre. You know,
You're just warming up.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Come back next year,
Right.
we're going to say 30. We still got 10,000 left to do.
That's
you know,
right.
So
We can tally
we're a
our
little bit behind
successes.
schedule, but
Well, I think, but seriously, what's next, I think, is so exciting is that as we love the tough cases, and we're the only ones who do tough cases.
yeah, we really do tough ones.
Because we're working with a fabulous bioinformatics guy and a couple of other volunteers who are looking at writing papers on imputation algorithms or whether to use different kinds of sequencing chips or machines or whatever. What we're trying to reach out to some of the more academic institutions and endeavors to do a better job with degraded DNA. We would love, for example, to do some of the 9/11 victims, but we're told that that DNA is so damaged and so tiny. Right, but the reason we're going to get them is because we're trying to make contacts with the research scientists who know what to do with tiny amounts of DNA and can get us better data to work with. And in the meantime, the databases just keep growing and growing.
Correct.
So,
and we're getting requests from overseas, too.
we're getting, right.
Those
and
are
we
a
have
little hard to deal with.
Because they're not as well represented in the databases, but we tell them that's coming along, as companies, particularly my heritage markets abroad, much more than the others.
Correct.
So what's ahead, I think, is that we'll be able to expand our reach to the even more difficult cases. And that's really exciting to me, is how we're developing tools and new protocols.
We cannot also not mention that there's a lot of legal questions that are arising with this. There's going to be a panel discussion here on that, on privacy, on, for example, custody of the data. If we do whole genome sequencing, does that have medical information in it? Is it abandoned DNA? Can you consider it abandoned DNA, and therefore, how do you deal with that? Do the police keep custody and be the custodian, respected custodian, or should they be hands off so nobody can say, "Oh, Big Brother has my DNA"? That old saying. So there's a lot of open questions among the legal community about they want to handle it appropriately. They're all good, they don't want their cases overthrown. They want to do it right. There's a lot of sincere, respectful work on that side of the fence that, is just about as important as all this other technical stuff. So in the future, I see a lot of those issues resolved, a lot of policy developed. I hope it's developed in the direction of continuing to use these methods in a very cooperative sense, so we can identify a lot more people.
And it brings up a lot of great questions, and I can see you two being leaders on that. I mean, as I'm sure you've worked through over the last year, process on your own, but yes, commercial databases bring up so many privacy questions just, before they're even being used for this.
Right.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
The panel will be fascinating. What do you hope to come out of that today?
Just knowledge, just the fact that people are, what they're considering, what that side is, or those kind of people on the panel are considering, what their thoughts are, because really there hasn't been a panel like that yet. There really hasn't been much of an open, formal discussion. Of course, it's flying all over the internet, and there's been articles and there's been, news articles and professional articles on that subject. So, hearing sort of personally a formalized discussion will be very, very interesting to me.
That brings up a good question. How has Ishi been for both of you? Maybe we can talk about the meeting a little bit. I have loved seeing you guys, and I'm so happy you were able to come back. How does that help you advance your work?
Well, people are going to see your video. Let's put number
You're
one.
going to advance our work.
You're going to advance our work. And then we're going to give a talk on Wednesday on Chandler. And what I'd like to emphasize is that is tough. We do really tough cases that ordinarily would go by the wayside. I know there's some easy cases now because my model is this: when the fingerprints were first computerized in the state of California, there were hits left and right, and then slowly, they leveled out so that you still use the tool and it's actually useful. You keep getting those hits, but not as quickly. So my view is that's the era we live in. It's a new tool. You're going to get some really quick, quick kills, I call them, which is all good. I personally would expect that to fall off to some extent after a while, but yet still have some. And in the meantime, these really tough cases are going to be addressed sort of at a steady pace. So I just want to point out that, I look forward to the steady state. It's all exciting now, but there's a lot of dynamics. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of unknown territory that has to be mastered. I think that'll happen, and my hope is that will all come to terms where we all cooperate and we can solve a lot of cold cases and John Doe cases and live happily ever after.
Well said, very well said. Now I have a big question for you. When am I going to be able to watch a reality show with the two of you doing your work? There has to be people who have approached you.
But yes, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of people. And today I think we got maybe
10
five.
today? Yeah,
5, 10
five today, just today.
Some days are busier than others.
It's
but it's
hard because it's not
madhouse.
our favorite part. We're neither of us media people.
Yeah, we're not. We just love
we
to
want to
do
go
work,
solve the
but-
cases, and I think our concern also is that very few of these cases they're all exciting stories that beg to be told, but unfortunately they involve a lot of families who want privacy and are going through a lot of pain.
Yeah.
So unlike, cold case documentary series where it's all sort of win-win and the victim's family is grateful, etc., that's not the nature of these stories. So it's hard to imagine a series of cases where it's not impacting a family in a negative way.
Correct.
So
Yeah. And
it's
that-
also hard to show what we do, because in assailant cases, you see the detectives out there knocking on doors and processing crime scene with the yellow tape. I have yellow tape over my door, but it's not the same thing,
Because the door is leaking.
The door is
because
right.
there's a
I
crime
used
in
it
your
because I
living
ran
room.
out of duct tape.
Yeah. I use that too,
See, I have a monitor with a lot of colorful post-its on it, and that's about all we can show in a documentary.
It's like two little old ladies sitting at their computer for an hour.
1 a.m. on Facebook.
Wow,
You
what?
got it.
What? I thought you said this was an exciting story. But it is. It is. Watch this. Look at this. You see how the data lines up?
I
Isn't
need to
that
move
exciting?
the clothes to the dryer. You can follow me in for that. I had a photographer following me around for the day for BuzzFeed, just to take one picture.
yeah.
He followed me into the kitchen while I put my bowl of cereal together and asked if he could take a shot of that.
Yeah, it's like, okay, whatever.
It was the most exciting thing that happened all day.
But I think that kind of media, this interview's great. This is the kind we really feel comfortable with and enjoy. As we said, we have been contacted by so many, and my feeling is it's part of getting the word out there. Neither one of us are media mavens. We don't do this to be on TV. We do it to solve cases, bring closure to the families, to help out, because we love doing that. We love the work. However, I do know that kind of series or that kind of documentary is inevitable. We hope it's done well. We hope, we have a lot of hopes, a lot of guidelines, a lot of showstoppers that we are outlining for
Demands.
those. Yeah, that
That's right.
that we have, and we're understanding it more now. We get it. We're smart. We get it. So I think that will be inevitable. However, I hope it's done well and it benefits everybody, not just us.
Yeah, I mean, the privacy issue is the big one for us, not only for the victims' families, but also, and this is why it's difficult to film us at work, we don't want them to see the matches, the second cousins, the third
Absolutely,
cousins. That's
yes.
all private information.
Right.
But also, we don't want any of our volunteers to be identified because we worry about their safety. So if you take those away, what's left? The bowl of
maybe
cereal.
a book in the future where you can vet it a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, you can tell the story of how the doe was found and
Yeah.
what happened. And in Buckskin's case, you don't really have to expose her family, but you can show that they replaced the stone with a new stone with a poem her mother wrote, part of a poem. And the relatives that showed up, if they are okay with that, you can do that, and then you can talk about the assailant, see if they're investigating it. there is something around it, but you have to be very respectful to the volunteers, the matches, and the Doe's families.
And I know you guys will take a thoughtful, respectful approach. And
We
I like
will.
that the word is getting out so that people can find you if they do need your
been finding us.
services.
They can find us,
Yeah.
yeah.
And where would
But
they
in
find
case
you?
they can't, DNADoeProject.org.
Okay.
123
perfect.
DNADoeProject.org.
We need a song.
Yeah, we need people to
Jingle.
surf in, you know. We do appreciate donations to help, you know, finance our Does. We don't make anything of this. This is all.
It's a pretty simple model. No one gets paid. And with 3,000 hours of work at typical professional genealogist pay, that's $100 an hour. You can do the math. We raise the funds to cover the test costs, and then a little bit to go towards our insurance and legal fees
that
and
kind of
corporate
thing.
fees, and that's it. No one gets paid for their time.
Yeah, correct.
It's pretty remarkable, I think. And I think
So far, so good.
I think that plus the ridiculous cases that you have been able to solve that have, you know, cold cases that have existed for so long with no hope of resolution.
Correct.
People are interested, and
Uphill
I can't
battle.
wait to see what the next year brings.
Yeah, well, we'll talk to you next year then.
Okay,
We'll
that
have a
sounds
lot
good.
more
That sounds
stories.
Or we'll
perfect.
have our people get it.
I know.
My
I
people-
know.
Our people will call your people and they'll do lunch.
Perfect. Thank you both so much.
Thank
I
you.
really
It was
appreciate it.
fun.
This is
You're welcome.
fantastic.